My story is definitely not as good as that. Definitely not. Like, that was so epic. Okay, so like, okay, it was like around Thanksgiving time, like, Michelle. Okay, it was like 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, probably like 2 or 3 years ago, and I was a junior in high school, and it was like a Sunday or whatever, and my mom is a baker, and she was like, oh, well, I have a new kitchen, so I am going to go to Lowe's and Home Depot and buy like some like shelves or whatever. And so my parents leave, and we've had like bacon and eggs, and they've made like hot spiced apple cider for dinner, and I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And I didn't drink any cider for breakfast, so I was like, okay, well, I'll make myself some more. So it was in a pot on the stove, and I was like, okay, well, I'll eat some more breakfast, and I'll eat some more bacon, and turn on the stove. Well, I turned it on, and I left it on, and I forgot that I left it on for like 4 hours, and I went upstairs, and I like took a shower, and like shaved my legs, and like took my time getting ready, and like put on some sweatpants and a t-shirt, like no bra, and I was just hanging out in the house. And we have these like recliner chairs, and so I'm like, I go and I like push the chair back to like sit back in the chair, and we have really high ceilings, and I look up and the ceiling is just like white, like all white, like you cannot see the lights, like you can't see like the woodwork on the ceiling, and I'm like, oh shit, what the hell is going on? And I turn around and look, and like we have 2 like door things, kind of like doorways stuff. We have 2 doorways from our kitchen that lead into our living room, and I turn around and look, and smoke is just like flowing out the kitchen, and I'm like, oh my god, what have I done? And I was like, okay. When I went to school, they told me, like when you have electrical fires, that you can't turn off any of the light switches because it'll like spread. Like, yeah, no, you should know this. You should know this. Okay. And like, you can't turn on or off any light switches because it'll like spark and like spread really fast. And I was like terrified. I was like, I can't turn off the TV. And I turn around and look, and the smoke is like below the cabinet line. And I'm like, oh shit, there's totally an electrical fire. And like the apple cider did not even cross my mind. And I was like, okay, well whatever, and I'm like, I run upstairs so fast, like I've never ran so fast in my life. And I grab my cell phone and I run outside and I get my dog and my cat and I call 911 and I'm like, my house is on fire, like what do I do? My parents aren't home. And they were like, it's okay, like are you outside? And I was like, yeah. Okay, so 4 fire trucks later, and like 3 cop cars, like, no, seriously, like I have 4 fire trucks, and like 3 of those little cheap Italian cars that have the sirens on top, all of them in my cul-de-sac, and all my neighbors are like running up the street, like, what's wrong, are you okay, is there anyone else in the house? And I'm like, no, it's just me, I'm fine, but I totally caught my house on fire. Okay, well then I'm standing there with the fireman, and he's like, all chill, he's like, whatever, and he's got his little radio, and you hear the other firemen come over the radio, and they're like, was she cooking something? And I was like, oh my god, no, and the fireman looks at me and he goes, you were cooking something, weren't you? And I said, yes, and he goes, what were you cooking? And I said, apple cider. And he was like, honey, he was like, that's what the problem was. And I was like, oh my god, it's been on for like forever. Okay, so I call my parents, like right after I call 911. And I'm like, oh my god, mom and dad, like the house is totally on fire. And they're like, okay, well did you get the dog out? And I'm like, well I left the front door open, but she hasn't come outside yet. And I was like, oh my god, I have to go save my dog. And like, I do not have a small dog, like it's a boxer. So she comes up to like right here, and like she's not a small dog. And I'm like, oh my god, she's like slipped and fallen, and I have to go inside the house to like rescue her. Okay, well our garage leads, like we have a 2-car garage, and then like there's this little back hallway, like a mudroom kind of thing. And then we have our laundry room. Well, the dog leash is in the laundry room. And I'm like, oh my god, I have to go get the dog leash so I can get the dog because she has an invisible fence, and I can't walk her over the invisible fence without a new collar because she's gonna like shock herself. And I was like, oh my god. So my mom is like, go get the dog, get a leash, get a collar, you need to save her. And I'm like, oh my god, okay. And so I get on my hands and knees and crawl through the mud room into the laundry room, and I open one of the floors, and the smoke level is like so bad that I'm like going like this trying to find a collar, and I find a leash that's like one of those super, super, super long leashes, and I loop it and like stick it around her neck, and we run outside. And so I had no idea where the cat was. She was probably just like laying on my bed or something. Anyways, so I call my parents, and they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll come home. Well, an hour later they show up. An hour later. No, seriously, an hour later. Like, they took forever. And they told me, they were like, well, I mean, we had a bunch of stuff in our buggies, and we had like 2 buggies full, and we sure weren't gonna like put it away. I mean, so we just took our time and finished our shopping and checked out. And I was like, okay, the house is on fire and you're like still shopping. Like, don't you think you should probably come home? Like, this is like all of your possessions. Like, this is everything. And I totally caught my house on fire. And so the firemen, they were like, you know, it's okay, it happens all the time, you were really smart, you did it exactly the right way, you called 911, you got out of the house, and I was like, okay, thanks, you know, and they were really sweet about it. Well, there was one time that a fireman came to our house, and when he was jumping out of the fire truck, he broke his ankle, and he remembered me, and he was like, oh, this is the same house I broke my ankle at. And I was like, oh, hey, sorry about that. And that was like 2 or 3 years before. Because my mom's a baker, right? So she like burns stuff all the time sometimes. Well, not all the time, I promise. But like, okay, so then there was another time, and it was like 11:35, or yeah, it was like 11:30 at night. And my mom is always baking. Well, she has 2 commercial cake kitchens downstairs in the basement, like when we finished our basement, and like finished it. And she opened a bag of flour and was pouring the flour in the mixer, and it like poofed everywhere and set off the fire alarms, and we couldn't get it to stop. So the firemen came back again with their sirens blaring at like 11:30 at night and like woke up all our neighbors. And they get there and they're like, oh, you're the girl that caught the house on fire with the apple cider. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's me. So I will forever be known as the girl who caught the house on fire with apple cider during Thanksgiving time. So